Hi everyone, it's Toby and thank you for joining me today. Welcome to my channel. We are today painting an urban watercolour. We're going watercolour first, straight onto the page. Loose shapes, focusing on simplicity and a few bright touches here and there before bringing it all together with a touch of ink. You really have to trust the process on this one. It's an amazing technique for beginners, but trust the process. It will look messy and they will look messy, and then at the end it will look amazing. If you want to get involved in more of these kind of techniques and some really in-depth teaching, check out my courses on sketchloose.co.uk, including the free course linked in the description below. And with that, let's get into this tutorial and I will take you step by step through every part of my process. And with that, let's get to our sketching. All you need today is 4 things. We've got a bit of cold press watercolour paper. We've got a watercolour brush size 10 and a fountain pen with an extra fine nib, and of course some watercolours. And we are going to dive straight into our painting process with the watercolours first. Now with our scene we can see that the building is sort of slightly, well, a very light colour, isn't it? Slightly yellow and a bit mucky. So I'm taking some handsy yellow and some of the muck from my palette, some of the old sort of neutral colours I've been mixing earlier. And we're just going to focus on really simple shapes. So we have a look and we find this house at the front. It's got basically a square front with a triangle on top for the roof. And we'll leave a little bit of negative space for our windows and our signs because, you know, whilst we're planning ahead, we can do that kind of thing. We're not trying to paint the whole page. What we're trying to do is fill the page with lovely loose and watery colours, and especially at this stage it's all about painting the light, keeping it loose, keeping it bright and letting the colours do all of the work. What I'm trying to do is within that vary what I'm using, so a little bit of extra of that mucky stuff in places, a little bit of extra yellow in places, but fundamentally keeping it light and bright and keeping it varied. As we move around again, just trying to plan ahead a little bit, keep some spaces, gaps for the windows we can see. Doesn't matter if there's extra gaps, doesn't matter if we leave gaps out. It's all about just being gentle. And with some of these gaps, I'm also just going to come in and soften the edges, make things blend and move a little bit more, keep them loose. As long as we're loose with our watercolours, as long as we keep those edges of our watercolours nice and soft, then we remain flexible, we remain able to adapt and respond as things happen. Moving along, we can see the next part of our scene is a sort of square with a woody colour, a browny orange. So I'm going to use here, I've got a little bit of Scarlet Lake mixed in with a little bit of lunar earth, and just using that to create these first tones and then to move back into the house behind. Again, just focusing on really simple shapes. The house behind is kind of a triangle with a little rectangle on top. And we can, again, blend and merge things together. These different shapes, we want them to be fairly clear, but we're not trying to draw them really clearly. We're not trying to make them too obvious on our page. We're trying to leave something to the imagination. Moving across, we can start suggesting some roof with a little bit of indigo now. And we can almost use this indigo to just do a little drawing, a little suggestion of the house off to the right. But at this point, we're away from our main focal point. So we just want to suggest. Coming back, keeping things uniform by keeping our colours sort of, similar throughout, using this same indigo mix to the other roof, the main roof. And again, keeping it varied. And look how the indigo is blending and blurring. We're not trying to keep it separate. We're trying to allow it to move. Same for the chimney, a little bit of red and let it move and blend around. Underneath, we notice this dark line at the bottom, and that also meets the main door as well. And we can use this same blending and blurring of our dark just to start suggesting some of the darker areas that are around and in the windows and places like that. Of course, if we make mistakes, it's fine because you can already see how these colours are softening out, blending out. We're not making any firm, hard decisions yet. We're just doing suggestions, focusing on clear shapes in our sketch. Into the background, we've got these other houses. Again, this isn't our main focal point, so this is really just suggesting clear shapes. I'm not super interested in the cars, so we're going to leave those out, and we're just going to focus on this kind of ready brick wall, the ready bricked houses, and again, clear shapes, really gentle, letting things blend and move. In the foreground, we've got this pavement, this sidewalk. Again, it's got a sort of pinkish tinge, so using that same mix, but this time with just a little bit more Scarlet Lake. And look, if we let that blend with that dark area of the house, I don't know how many times I can say blend today, but it is really important. If we let all these colours blend, they become soft and we haven't made any firm decisions. It means we can come back later and really change things up and make a difference. And, you know, if we've made mistakes, we can correct it. And if we are relying on our ink, well, our ink is going to be able to do an awful lot of work with not very much effort. I just want to add some of that yellow. I love getting a nice road marking in. And again, leaving these white areas and then mixing it in just gives it this hard and soft appearance, which is really nice for making things, again, just flow across the page. And just like that, we're pretty much there for our first layer. Really light, really loose, focusing on the main parts of the scene and not overdoing it. We need to let this dry, then we can come back and add our next layer of bolder colours. And here we are, mostly, not entirely, but mostly drying. We can see touch dry in the important places. And we're going to come back and really we're going to start applying those bold colours. We're going to start applying those shadows all with the same brush and the same palette. So now I'm going to focus a lot more on those deeper tonal colours, those ones with more value. So starting with our indigo, mixing a little bit of cobalt in there. Again, the real key in this kind of technique is to keep things varied, not just make a flat block of colour, but use a constantly sort of varying colour. We can start with some of these lovely reflections. So a little bit of indigo at one point, a little bit of cobalt above it, and we get this nice varied wash that goes between the windows and makes them feel, well, authentic, like that reflection that we really do have. You can see in places I've left negative space where there isn't really negative space. Don't let that bother you. This is something which we will learn to enjoy and live with as we complete our sketch. Down below we've got these other windows. These are much darker, so using mainly just that indigo now. We can keep using this indigo in all the other dark areas, the doorway underneath the house, just pushing it around, pulling it around and adding these blocks, but then coming back and again softening and blending it out. I did say I'm going to overuse the word blending for this whole painting, but it's really important not to just let your watercolours sit where you first put them. One of the big powers of watercolours is the ability to move them, to drag them, to add water to them even when they're on the page. And that really starts creating a sense of light and prevents them feeling really overworked. At the top, what we're doing really is, if we squint, we can see the darkest areas, the places with the highest value. And we're trying to go find those areas little by little and just gather them up with our darker values here. This isn't our darkest because we're going to come in with a touch of ink, or if you didn't want to use ink, you could use a very fine watercolour brush and come in with some very dark paint. But what we're trying to do is just find these darker areas, either areas of shadow or just of higher value for other reasons, and really get them punching out through our painting. That means more pigment and less water than the first step, and it means still keeping it loose, really focusing on being soft and gentle. Added a little bit of quinacridone gold, in Hansi yellow below the windows, and now these signs we can start giving a real punch of colour with some Scarlet Lake, just a really bold primary red. And this sign's a bit too big, but again, it doesn't matter. We're being loose, and if we stepped a little bit to the left and took the same photo, it would look a bit bigger. So you're never wrong, you're just different on making decisions and reacting. That's one of the joys of watercolours, of course. Now we can move away from our focal point for a bit and move towards these browny areas, a bit more lunar earth. Again, Notice how we're not painting over everything though. What we're doing is we're adding some bolder colours on top of the light colours. Those light colours are the light, those shiny bright areas coming through. These bolder colours are almost the main colour of each of the objects. In the distance we can add windows and things using bolder colours again, but it's still being very soft and suggestive rather than trying to really make our image firm. We're not trying to finish it all in one go. This is where I talk about trusting the process. You need to go through these steps, really light, loose shapes, and now gradually sort of increasing the tone, increasing the structure little by little. It's still going to look a mess. It's still going to be looking a total mess by the end of this stage, but just trust it and don't worry. What I'm trying to do in different places, just get a bit more texture, suggest perhaps a few little brick marks and things like that, very loosely with these colours, and just see is there any other little bits that I'd like to do. Something quite fun to do at this point can always be splash, add in a little touch of water onto your colours. That loosens them up, moves them, and adds an awful lot of texture as well. And with that, that is the end of this. That's the end of step 2. And now we can move on to step 3. Step 3, we are deciding really about what we want to do with the background. And you could leave this background completely blank. If you look at the sky in the reference, it's very light. Equally, we could do something like this. So I'm going to do a few splashes of cobalt, a few splashes of indigo in the sky, and then just soften them out with water, move them around and create this very light, textured and varied sky. This means it's not going to take over the scene, which is a risk if you come in with a big flat brush or something and try and really create a dramatic sky. And we can reflect that same idea down below as well to really gather up a bit more texture into the tarmac. When I'm adding a sky like this, I often want it to connect to my image. So coming back in and adding some more paint, perhaps in the chimneys, perhaps at the side of the roofs, top of the roofs, getting these little blooms, little cauliflowers which link, connect, join up, soften out. And for me, that connection of everything is a really lovely part of watercolour painting. And it's that connection which means we stay flexible. And it means that we come back with our pen, suddenly we can actually make decisions. We can make hard decisions with little faint black lines, which really just make an amazing sudden difference. And just like that, we wait for it to dry and we can come back in with our pen. Now I'm using a carbon ink, which is a lovely waterproof ink in my TWSBI fountain pen. You could use a brush pen. You could use even a watercolour brush, a very fine one, like a size 2 or 4, and just use some dark watercolour to achieve exactly the same thing. The importance here is just to use something dark to gather that structure. Now we're not trying to draw around every shape. What we're trying to do is find the key shapes and really use this very contrasting black ink to suddenly add so much structure, add the outlines, add the key elements, add a few details, like you might want to add the words. We've got free house on the left and we've got the whistle on the right. We might want to just add these kind of little touches in either now or perhaps later on when you're more certain about exactly what you think needs to be there. Moving around again, just finding key elements and responding to the watercolours. So where the yellow has gotten a little bit larger than it should be, according to the reference, we can just make that shape a bit larger. This is about not creating a faithful representation of the scene. Rather, it's about creating the essence of the scene and a lovely piece of art which flowed and was fun and just happy and enjoyable to make. Similarly with our sign, I made it too big, so I'm giving it 2 arms to hold it onto the wall, because for me that makes more sense. It makes it look more like it sort of is like I meant to do it like that, rather than me just responding. But what we're really doing the whole time is we are just responding to what is going on. Moving around, we might pick out textures as well. A few brick marks here, a few sort of wood marks perhaps in a couple of places. Just finding those key little textures that we want to add in, but always being delicate, always making sure that we're not overdoing the ink. Watercolours are permanent. As soon as you pop them down and they've dried, you can't really take them back up again. And it's the same with ink, even more so. Once it's there, it's there. So don't overdo it. Do less than you think you need, and you can always come back and add a little bit more later. Having done that, of course, I can now move around and find a few more textures that I do want to add, and just see, are there other things which would really help the scene? A bit more clarity to the pavement, maybe some little marks on the pavement to add some suggestion. Maybe these buildings in the back which are very loose, just a tiny bit of ink will just, show the viewer a bit more information, whilst also still keeping them in the distance and loose. And with that, we can kind of move on to step 5. Step 5 is where we think about those finishing touches. So I've not yet painted these hangers, have I? These hangers. But we can actually do this the other way around. So we can start with ink and just pop on some dark contrasting baskets. And then as we do that, we can move around and find some other little points to contrast. Dark bits in the window, little bits on the door, just tiny areas to make really bold and increase the contrast. And of course, when you have really dark areas, that makes your light areas look brighter. So increasing contrast is actually about making things light as well as making things dark, or making things appear light as well as making things appear dark. Having done those final pen touches, we can come back, grab our watercolours and start just doing again those final touches. For me, this is going to revolve around getting these baskets looking great. So some nice punchy greens to start with, just in each of our hanging baskets, and then a little deeper green at the side as well. And then trying to use colours we've already used, some punchy yellow, a little bit of red and a little bit of blue. Now, what you'll notice as I do this is it goes a bit wrong. So all these colours blend and blur together. And, what happens when you mix all of your primary colours together? You get mud, or you get grey. So now I've got a big grey blob. Because I'm still painting with lots of water, it's okay though, because I can just come back in with my brush and I can pull that mud out. And I can sort of take myself back to school and remember what I'm supposed to be doing. So I pull that out, and now I can just be a little bit more careful and just touch in a couple of those colours again. And, this is all a part of the process of watercolour sketching, responding to mistakes, responding to what happens, rather than just assuming that things are going to work out first time. A few little splashes are always great, especially around plants and things. And we can use our yellows and our reds as well to just give that punchy feel, suggestion of flowers. Amp up the contrast in the sky with a few splashes of our murkier blues. And before you know it, we are pretty much done. So with that, I'm just going to do these last little flicks of darkness. Never keep going when you don't know what you're doing. Always stop as you sort of lose the plot, because when you're not sure what you're doing, you're probably overworking it. So that's where I've stopped here rather than continued to go. Pop my signature on and feel great about my little sketch. If you want to find out more about my sketching processes, come join me in the videos linked below in the description and the pinned comment. I will see you there. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel, because it makes me really happy. Thanks again.